Hi, this is Itamar Gilad, and today I wanted to tell you about my book, Evidence Guided, that I recently published. It's a book about product discovery, about modern product development, and how you can bring these principles into your organization. At the beginning of the book, in the introduction, you will find explanations and also a self-test, how you can do things. And also the book is outlined and explained to you, so you can understand how to use it. In the first chapter, I talk a little bit about the current system, which I call opinions-based development. Essentially, we develop strategies and roadmaps and projects and lead to execution, mostly based on opinions. I suggest an alternative model, which I call GIST. GIST is at the heart of this book. It's goals, ideas, steps, and tasks. The 4 areas of change we need to implement in order to bring this more modern approach into our companies. And I give a full example from Gmail where we use this approach. Then we jump into each one of the elements and we start with goals. So goals essentially describe what are the objectives we're trying to achieve and what we can measure along the way in order to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. And I try to give you a lot of tools like the value exchange loop and the North Star metric, and as well metrics trees, in order to explain how you can set up your goals in a very aligned way across the organization, in your team, in your group, and then turn them into the popular format of objectives and key results. So throughout the book, I'm giving examples in OKR format just because it's so popular. And by the way, at the end of each chapter, there are takeaways. So you don't need to create summaries. It's already summarized for you. And there's also footnotes where you can find various resources. In chapter 3, we talk about ideas, and I explain why most ideas are actually not good and why the scientific method calls for us to evaluate and test ideas, what I call evaluation and validation. And the evidence generated in this loop helps us improve, park most ideas, but actually switch on and deliver on the most important ideas. So this chapter explains how you do this with ICE, impact, confidence, and ease. I explain how to manage the flow of ideas throughout your system, and then how to evaluate impact and also ease, and most importantly, confidence. So I teach this tool that is now pretty popular called the confidence meter that evaluates various forms of evidence and gives them a score based on the weight on how important they are. So that's chapter 3. In chapter 4, we look deeper into how we are actually going to test our ideas and validate them, and that's what I call steps. A step is basically any sort of build, measure, learn loop that moves us both on the level of confidence, but also on the level of scope. So we grow the code base, but at the same time, we grow our understanding and our learnings. So I give full examples of how you can do this step by step, and it's all things you can implement in your own company. And then we talk a little bit about the various forms of validation techniques we have. And by the way, behind all of this, there are more resources that are available to you. There's a book resource page that where you can find more details on everything you see. And then we move into tasks. Tasks are about how we bring this into the lives of our Agile product teams. Today, Agile is kind of living in its own secluded world that is disconnected from the planning. And I suggest changing this, having the Agile team take part in the discovery as well. I suggest a tool called the GIST board, and that kind of helps us build projects in a slightly different way that is both including learning and development. And I explain how to integrate this with either Scrum or Kanban with your team. From there on, the book tries to explain how to introduce the system into your company. So we have a full chapter 6, called the Evidence Guided Company, that explains how a full company can operate using this model, including the top metrics trees of the company, including the North Star metric, including company level OKRs, which are then translated into team level OKRs, organization topology of the product organization, various ways to implement ideas, big projects, dependencies, and of course, roadmaps. So this chapter tries to tackle many of the sticky items that might prevent you from switching today. Then we move into a series of chapters that explain how to implement GIST in your own type of company. In Scaling GIST, I explain how GIST works in startups, in scale-ups, and in enterprises. And for each one, I try to give examples and OKRs and different ways you can implement the model in your size of company. But of course, size is only one part of the equation, and a larger part is the type of product you're developing and the type of market. So that's covered in GIST patterns. And here we talk about large B2B, so enterprise scale GIST, B2C, internal teams, multi-sided marketplaces, and even hardware products, physical products. And for all of those, I try to give both ideas of how to tackle the biggest challenges, but also examples. And lastly, the last chapter is called Adopting GIST. And this is perhaps the biggest challenge. How do we bring the change into our organization? How do we get our colleagues, our managers, our stakeholders to accept a system like that? And that's the entire chapter is devoted to this topic. We start with the common challenges you might and objections you might encounter, like lack of trust, or we don't have the resources, or we don't have the time, etc. And for each, I try to give you some ammunition how to tackle them. But then we move into actual ways to drive the change. So actual techniques that work, and including, and I think that's very important, how to set up measurement, how to make sure that your system is actually working. And there's a number of metrics I suggest here. And some words of encouragement, because you are going to be the change agent and you are going to work to convince others that this is a good method, but it's a very rewarding change. And if you are able to pull it off, I think you will enjoy it a lot. Finally, other resources that you can find, like the companion page and courses and other things that might help you. And this is basically the entirety of the book. So it's designed for product managers, for designers, for researchers, for engineers, for managers, even for business stakeholders that are interested in learning how to adopt this kind of more modern version of product development.